So I moved out of my house into a 19-foot van with my two big dogs in September of 2016. I remember my hand shaking as I'm like plugging in for the first time. How does this work? But I was stayed at a very kind of remote campground near Boone, about a half hour away on top of a little mountain. And that first night, I, made a fire. So I felt proud of that. Cooked my dinner of it, felt pretty proud of that. I'm like, I'm badass. Watch me. I got in this, small single bed in the back of this van, and my dogs are looking at me like, what have you done? They settled down. The moon came out, and I thought, this is the most normal I felt, and I can't remember when.
That was the voice of Rebecca Gummere, and it is my absolute delight to have her on as the guest of this episode of the Page and Stage podcast, where we explore the art and craft of writing and performance. As always, I'm your host, Jason Cannon. Before diving into my conversation with Rebecca, a brief Page and Stage plug. This podcast is only one part of my story coaching work. You can check out everything I'm up to over at pageandstage.art, including my other podcast, 100 Plays, a storytelling resources page, archives of all previous podcast episodes, my own books and plays, and my weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes. You can sign up for free and get the newsletter directly into your inbox each Friday, as well as every new podcast right into your inbox every Monday. Everything is free, but if you find value in all this storytelling content, you can financially support me at pageandstage.art or forward any of the newsletters or podcasts to other story-loving friends, or hire me outright as your personal story coach. So, if you're working on a memoir, play, or speech, I cannot wait to hear your story. Now, let me tell you a bit more about my awesome guest, Rebecca Gummere. Rebecca is an award-winning writer, traveler, dreamer, lover of dogs, and cooker and eater of food. Following 14 years of service as an ordained pastor, Rebecca worked for a domestic violence and rape crisis center, taught in the rhetoric and composition program at Appalachian State University, and worked for a nonprofit food hub promoting local farmers. Her writing has appeared in Time, HuffPost, The Daily Beast, The New York Times, the late great Gettysburg Review, among others. Her memoir, Chasing Light, One Van, Two Dogs, and an Ex-Pastor's Search for the Divine, is currently being read by agents, and she's working on a second memoir, A Strange and Beautiful Place. In her Substack newsletter, Mystery, Memoir, and Meaning, Rebecca writes essays about grief and loss, awe and wonder, some faith stuff, and is also messing around with serializing a mystery novel, Dead Ringer. And as a bonus, at the end of this episode, she shares one of her can't-miss recipes. Here we go with my conversation with Rebecca Gummere. I am online here with Rebecca Gummere, and we were just having fun with your last name. I had it spelled wrong in my files all this time, but it's Gummere, like come here, Rebecca Gummere. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on.
Oh my goodness. So we're going to have a lot of fun because there's a lot of overlap. This is something I'm going to surprise you with. There's a lot of overlap in our histories that we'll get to. But before we get to all of your writing and everything else, we were introduced by a colleague, a friend, David Sittler, who was a guest on this podcast back in season 1, who I've had the delight of working with in the theater a couple times. Spider-Man, totally, yes. But I would love for you, because we were just talking, recount how you and David met, because that's going to lead us right into some really cool conversation.
Yeah. In my first call, back in my other life when I was a Lutheran pastor, my first call was to a congregation in Dayton, Ohio. And during the summer, we would do an outdoor worship service. And one morning when I was leading the service, afterwards, this tall guy with a sort of unusual hairstyle came up and introduced himself to me. And he had this very kind of Native American thing going on. And it turned out that he was in the area for doing summer stock theater in a production called Blue Jacket, and he was the lead. And so he just wanted to introduce himself and see if there were, be a reader and a worship assistant, anything like that. And so I asked him, because he had said he'd attended the Lutheran Church in Manhattan. And I said, well, what's the name of, I'm not like there aren't, 100 Lutheran churches in Manhattan. I don't know if there
Right.
are or not, but, what are the chances? Anyway, he gave me the name, and I said, well, one of my very best friends from seminary did her internship there. He said, oh, yeah, I know Lynn. He said, I was on her internship committee. From then on, we got to know each other and then have just stayed in touch over the years. He's come to North Carolina, where I live now, to come to Greensboro to be in various productions. And on occasion, I would drive to see the production and that kind of thing. So yeah, just a good friend, and lovely that he connected us. I'm grateful. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always just delighted to meet fellow storytellers and writers. And in this case, I love how you put this, your first call. So were you, just a quick origin story here, Rebecca, were you raised Lutheran? Were you called to from a different religious upbringing? What drew you to going into being? Because this is going to lead right into, I think, your writing career, as my guess, based on reading your website. What was your first call? Where did that come from? And how did you land? You got an MDiv and everything.
Yeah.
How did you end up a Lutheran minister?
Yeah. So the answer is no. I did not grow up in the Lutheran Church. The sort of religious background, my mother and father both were Methodist, but by the time, so I'm the youngest of three daughters, and I'm youngest by far. So kind of by the time I came along, there were a lot of things they were done with. And yeah, and also at the same time, we were moving around. My dad was a corporate guy. During those times, because I'm 72, so it's been a few years. Back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the way you climbed the corporate ladder was you either hopped from job to job or you stayed with one company your whole life. Like people would even say, I'm a Westinghouse man. But my dad liked to see the options that were on the horizon. So we moved every year or two. So the upshot of all that is that we really didn't go to church that much. And by the time my sisters were grown and gone, we didn't really go at all. So it wasn't really part of, Sundays I might go ride my horse or take a walk with my mom or something like that. But there was always this sense, I think I'm hardwired to seek wonder. I'm drawn toward awe, the natural world and the wonders it holds. And attached to that is, I was that kid that was always saying, why? And I think, again, the hard wiring of just, I want to explore, I want to discover. I used to think that I wanted answers. That's a conversation we can pick up in a few minutes. So,
Totally.
yeah. So I always had a real questioning mind, and philosophy fascinated me when I got into college and started dipping into philosophy. And maybe just because I like the arguing too. There was something about, arguing, making point, and arguing furthers the conversation in the philosophy world. Well, it does in theology as well. That's the point. It wasn't really until I was in my 20s that my middle sister developed breast cancer, and within a couple of years died. And she and I were very close, and I was just devastated. I was 27 years old, and it happened right around the same time my first child was born. So, there was just a lot of spiritual questions. And so at that time, a friend of mine got me connected to a church that was it was loosely affiliated with the United Church of Christ, UCC, but it was pretty liberal, pretty progressive. And I got connected there and got to be good friends with one of the pastors, who I then, a couple of years later, after I joined the church, entered. It was a 2-year cover-to-cover study of the Bible, reading of the Bible. And for me, I remember him saying, when we came in and sat down, he said, anything that you know about the Bible, I want you to just park it outside. And I'm like, well, that works for me because I don't know. I mean, other than the little, the booklet that my grandmother got me when I was, I don't know, 8 years old, and she sent me to vacation Bible school in Louisville, Kentucky. and I
Yeah.
was supposed to memorize the Beatitudes. So none of it, really it was a pretty obscure thing, but again, I wanted answers and I wanted more. So I did the 2-year study. I entered it, and 1 year into it, my second child was born with a heart defect, had surgery when he was 4 days old. And then when he was 6 weeks old, he died very suddenly.
Oh my
So
God.
these two death experiences really close together kind of catapulted me toward, okay, these are real questions. And this is, I don't want to say serious because life is serious, but for me, things came really close to the bone of like, what does it all mean, I guess.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about a call, I really didn't experience that until maybe a couple of years after this 2-year Bible study ended. And what I realized, two things I realized. The church that I was a member of was starting to have some issues that revolved around power and honesty and things like that. And I realized that it mattered to me a whole lot that the church should be the church, my understanding of what I was becoming to understand. And the other thing that I realized at the end of that Bible study was I want more. I mean, I was ravenous for more, and a 6-week study on a letter to Paul, or a letter from Paul, wasn't going to do it. And so I went and talked to my pastor friend, and he said, well, maybe you could consider seminary just for your own edification. I'm like, that sounds cool. There were 3. I was living in Columbus, Ohio at the time, and there were 3. There was a pontifical seminary, Josephinum. There was a Methodist theological school there, and then there was a Lutheran seminary. And his opinion, he came from a Presbyterian background, but his opinion, he said, the Lutherans really have the academics. And he said, also, they have the liturgy. I didn't know what liturgy was, but I just sort of ended up there. And at one point I did experience a sense of, I was just going to take some classes. And while I was there, a number of the faculty and staff assumed I was in the MDiv program. I said, well, that wasn't, and reflecting to me, alongside the sense of the church should be the church and that matters in the world. Anyway, I just experienced a sense of call that I think this is the track I'm on. So I went ahead with the Master of Divinity track, and that involved taking Greek and Hebrew and Old Testament and New Testament and church history and preaching and all of those things. And I loved it. I loved it so much. And I'd say I was on the 7-year plan, because during that time, well, I started part-time because I had my kids. So
Right.
my oldest was, I think he had just started elementary school. And then my youngest, we had a daughter after my son Cooper died. So they were, I was part-time. I started part-time because I had kiddos. And also during that time, my marriage was ending. And so I took a year off from seminary. But anyway, I do remember the dean of students the day I was graduating in 1993 said, well, we either have to graduate you or give you tenure. I'd been hanging around a while. They were tired of me. Time to get rid of her. So, yeah, so I had, and in the Lutheran Church, a call is really extending an invitation to come and be the pastor. And the understanding is that comes through the intuiting of the calling of the Holy Spirit. It comes through the congregation's discernment that, yes, you are the good match for them. And it comes through the individual's sense that yes is. And so it's really, those 3 things are in place. And then there's a call to ministry. And it's tied to that congregation. So I had a first call there. I had a second call at a small mission development congregation in Cary, North Carolina. And I had a third call to a church in Boone, North Carolina, which was in part of the call had to do with doing campus ministry there for Appalachian State University students, Lutheran students there. And yeah, and then but I said earlier, I really didn't want answers. What I really learned that I craved was more mystery. And in a way, I was in a position where the questions that I had, it was preferred maybe not asked. That's not the role, I guess, of a pastor, is to have the questions. I had them. I had a lot of them. And I had a lot of questions about the systems of the church and about some of the faith tenets and that kind of thing. And there came a point where I felt like maybe I can't say those with as much conviction as I used to. And if so, I need to not be in this position. And, alongside that, I was feeling that tug. I've been writing all my life. As a kid, I was writing little short stories and poems and that kind of thing. Had a couple of publications before seminary, a regional magazine. Had one, actually, my first national publication was in US Air magazine when that used to be a thing. So the writing bug came back in a big way. And so, when you realize there are things you can't say that you want to say, that you feel are important to say, I felt like I needed to be in a place to do that. So I left ministry, and that's when I went to work for the next 7 years for our county's domestic violence and rape crisis center. And it was during that time that I felt a new kind of call, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it's still, I mean, that kind of job is a ministry in its own way as well. I mean, they go to the meaning of the word. You can strip it of any kind of spiritual bias. A ministry, you were ministering to these women, and that feels kind of almost like a natural progression for you. Because talk about other people having huge questions about what does this mean.
Right.
That makes me that was kind of the next step as you were also exploring your writer muscles. That to me just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it was a cause I really believed in. During the time I was serving in ordained ministry, many times I had women come to me and disclose situations they were in or past trauma.
Of course.
And so I did feel that with my role at the agency that that felt a cause that was important to me. But it was during that time that I then entered a low residency MFA program, because I thought I've always wanted to do this. Well, I'm just going to do it. This is something I've wanted to do all my life. The MFA degree letters don't necessarily mean that much to me. What I craved and what I wanted was probably what I wanted in seminary too. I wanted that knowledge and I wanted the community. I wanted to be part of people who, as I say, are similarly afflicted with this writing thing.
Oh my goodness, we're having a support group right now, Rebecca.
Exactly. And, in ways that our friends are like, oh, that's nice, honey, and pat you on the head, and maybe just don't understand this sort of need to put things down on paper, to, record your life, or to tell stories, or to make things up out of whole cloth. It's a thing. So it was during that time that I got my MFA. During those years also, my parents died. They had moved up to Boone, where I was living, and they were in their 90s. And so my dad died in 2009. My mom died in 2014. And right around then, and she left me a little nest egg that said, well, this writing thing, I'm going to try it full time.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's what I did. And yeah, interesting choice.
It's amazing.
I did it.
That's amazing.
I don't
So,
know.
and the writing thing full time. So, because another huge part of your story, Rebecca, is this solo cross country trek. Just you and a small RV and your two boxer dogs, your two dogs at the time. Talk about this was kind of your eat, pray, love moment, right? This was your what motored what spurred you to do this? And then follow-up question, because that also ended up being your first memoir, which you're still shopping around, but it's a complete memoir. What spurred you then to take that adventure, that experience, and turn it into a full-length memoir? Just please, what is that story?
Really, I was on a whole other track, which means I was for my MFA thesis, I was working on an essay collection. And I had, the strategy, the process is get some of those published. And so those had been, I had submitted them, a couple of pushcart nominations, some publications, and some like the Gettysburg Review, and some fairly prominent places that would mean something maybe to a publisher who'd be looking at an essay collection. And it was 2016. It was July. I was sitting in my little bungalow in the mountains of North Carolina, this little 100-plus-year-old house with the window open, about 7:00 in the morning. And this breeze came in. I kid you not. This breeze came in and blew across my arms. I was, had my laptop, and all of a sudden I was like, I'm going to take a trip.
My God.
I'm this thing. And as I unpacked it later, I realized, we lived on a 80-acre farm up in Northeast Ohio, out in the middle of nowhere, and I rambled those woods. And I remember there was also a creek that came through the property. And at one point past our property, it widened. I remember being 12 years old and standing there and feeling this pull, like wanting to just go wherever that river went. So, some of that may have to do with the fact, like I said, we moved around all the time. Do I have wanderlust? I do. I still do. I want to see new stuff. I want to go places. But that morning in July was just an amazing moment. And I thought, I'm going to do this. And it had been just for fun. I'd been thinking about buying an RV, thinking, hey, kids, we can go camping, we can do things. And I knew which one I would want to look for. It just landed on me. And I thought, okay, here we go. And I sat in that chair till 4:00 in the afternoon without moving, writing. What's this going to be like? Why are you going to do this? I named the trip. I named it Chasing Light, because I was at a very low point. I had just gotten bad news about some friends. I had read a pretty shattering essay about child soldiers in Africa. I was at a really low point. I was really in an F you God stage. Like, I don't want anything to do with this God, if this is how it operates. And it felt dark and heavy. And so that's how it started. I emptied out my house. I gave away most of my stuff, which was so freeing. And all that kind of guilt that you might have as being like the caretaker I remember my mom, when she was still alive, saying, don't you want to keep that pair of your mama's little leather shoes from when she was 2 years old, those handmade shoes? And I'm like, well, I know the answer to that question to you today is yes. But I mean, it all went. And so maybe antique stores got stuff. I put stuff on Facebook to friends. Does anybody want this? There's a young woman that, because she wanted some of the antique lamps and the doilies. And it's like, I would love it for people to enjoy these.
Right.
The things that I had in storage, the china and things like that I just don't live like that anymore. And what good does it do to have things sitting in boxes? That's dumb. And, when you pay to store it, it's like, well, now my stuff owns me.
Right.
So I gave away most of my stuff. I did store some things so that when I came back, I'd have some furniture, kept my bed and,
Right.
basic things like that. And the boxes of books and manuscripts, duh. Have to keep those. And then I rented out my house to some friends who it just so happened they needed. It's like, suddenly we need this, and suddenly I'm ready to go. So I moved out of my house into a 19-foot van with my 2 big dogs in September of 2016. And I rented with fear and trepidation, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I remember my hands shaking as I'm like plugging in for the first time. How does this work? But I stayed at a very kind of remote campground near Boone, about a half hour away, on top of a little mountain. And I was one of 3 people there. That place was empty. And that first night, made a fire. So I felt proud of that. Cooked my dinner of it. Felt pretty proud of that. I'm like, I'm badass. Watch me. And, that night I got in this, small single bed in the back of this van, and my dogs are looking at me like, what have you done? They settled down. The moon came out, and I thought, this is the most normal I felt, and I can't remember when. I loved it so much. I loved it so much. And I went through 17 states, 12,000 miles over about 8.5 months. There were times along the way where I was like, I just want to go home. And my conversations with myself, I would say, well, anytime you can. You can turn around and go home anytime you want. Like, I love it too much. The open road, what's down the road, and to travel with everything that you need, and to realize that's all I needed.
Wow. Yeah, of course.
I got to Montana and sent 2 boxes home. Like, well, I don't need these clothes. I don't need that. The things that I needed had to do with my kitchen, because I love to cook and I love to eat. I mean, when you're choosing what is it I'm going to take, well, I'm like, well, obviously I need a zester, a citrus zester. Clearly, those kinds of little kitchen gadgets. But I took a canvas wine bag and I put in it, a spatula, a ladle, some wooden spoons, my 2 really good knives that I'm obnoxious. I take them everywhere when I travel. And, zester and grater for cheese. Beyond that, I think I had a couple strainers, but that was kind of all I needed. And there was a little 2 burner propane stove in there. And then where I could, I would cook over fire at campgrounds and places like that. So as it turned out, from about March, April on, there were burn bans because it was one of those years. And by the time I was coming home, there were wildfires just like behind me, pushing us. And triple digit heat, which is really dangerous for my dogs. And because the van was old, it kept overheating if I used the air conditioning in that.
Oh, wow.
So I started in January, February, started in Florida and went across Louisiana, Texas, etc. And that was all easy peasy. And then I didn't realize, I had thought, gosh, winter, be careful. No, summer was the challenging time to travel because of the heat and the wildfires and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
so 12,000 miles, you said, 17 states. This was like 8 months overall. What was there a moment that you knew it was time to go home?
Well, I came home a month early. I was planning to be on the road 9 months. So I was in Montana. I was planning to head down to Colorado, and I wanted to go to Taos. So I missed northern New Mexico when I came through because it was March, and in a rear wheel drive van, I'm not going to play with snow. So I missed Albuquerque, I missed Taos, and I thought, well, I can do that in the summer. But because, the day that I finally decided to go home, behind me, there were 1 million acres on fire in Montana. The internet route, I thought, well, I'll just go to Minnesota because it's 80 degrees up there right now. And there's a wolf rehabilitation center that I think I could see. That interstate was closed because of smoke and wildfires. To the south, triple digits in Wyoming. And I was looking at places. Is there some place I can quickly rent? But none of the places had air conditioning. I had one of my boxers was pretty old, and because they have that abbreviated snout, they can get into real trouble when it's too hot. And the only route open was home. I just realized. And as it turned out, halfway back, the dogs got sick, so it was the right time to call it. So I'll back up and say, as soon as I realized I was taking this trip, as I started emptying out my house, I started keeping a blog, because as I say, the journey really begins the moment you know you're going to take it.
Yeah.
And I knew I was going to write about it. I really knew I was going to write a memoir about it, but I knew I wanted to write about it. That's how I process anyway. And it became a travel blog that people jumped on and joined me on the trip, which was really lovely to have people along for the ride. About April into that trip, a story that I'd written about my son Cooper that died was the cover story on Oh the Oprah magazine.
Oh, wow.
And all of a sudden, a whole lot more people joined the journey, which was really lovely. And not just the trip, but also my spiritual journey of seeking. So yeah, so when I got back, which was September of 2017, and I really I printed out that blog and I put it up on my wall in my little house. And I started going around with highlighters, trying to see what I was telling myself, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So from that, I finished the first draft of the memoir in 2020. And that was in Albuquerque. And so during that time, I had sold my little house and moved to Albuquerque. Right as I landed in Albuquerque, December 28th, 2019, and I signed the lease to rent a lovely little house near University of New Mexico in this beautiful old area in like February 18th of 2020. And we all know what happened. I went to AWP, the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. That was in San Antonio. Flew home on March 9th, thinking most of my stuff that was back in storage in North Carolina, I could drive back and get. But we were, got off the plane and walked in my house, and that was that for a long time.
Yep.
But it was during, I came to New Mexico again for the arts and writing community. And so it was during that time that I completed the first draft of the memoir.
Okay.
So that's kind of it. I, went through many iterations and beta readers and so on and so forth. And I started querying agents in 2021 and then did some more rewrites. And anyway, the usual journey.
Rebecca, I have to say, I was really taken by this description of pasting wallpaper in your house with your draft and on your feet, walking around, editing on your feet with this highlighter. Like that I find that so delightful. I actually work out of a closet, right? I have just this office, this closet that I've turned into my office. And I yearn for the days where I can have like one of those 4-foot whiteboards and a corkboard.
Right.
So to have walls covered with your words,
yeah,
you can walk around and edit. That to me sounds like a dream. But I'm curious now, having done that, how Rebecca Gummere, the writer now, because you're a full-time writer still, you have a Substack that we'll talk about as well.
Mm-hmm.
You've written essays, other stories, other books. But what is Rebecca's process? I can't imagine that every essay or story gets wallpapered, but where do your ideas come from? How do you capture them? How do you curate them? What's your daily practice as a writer? Just kind of setting that up to talk about Rebecca's practice and process as a writer.
Right. One of my instructors in my MFA program, which I was at Queen's University of Charlotte, Susanna Lassard was one of my instructors. And I remember her saying one day, every writer has about 6 or 7 themes they work on across the board. And I thought, well, that's so true. I was in that place where I was thinking, am I too repetitive? No, this is your thing. These are the big questions you have. You come at them in a variety of different ways, but in a way, it's kind of the same questions that you're kicking around. So I have on my laptop, I have a whole folder of ideas and essays. So I have way more than I will ever get to write, because when they come to me, I jot them down. And it can be something like, I'm looking out the window. I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina right now, and I'm looking out at a tidal creek where there are herons and egrets. And I might see an egret in flight, and it might trigger something that I want to write about. And so I'll write that down. So I've got this whole messy folder of those, and every once in a while I'll go pull them out. And especially if there's something timely that comes up that might be happening in the news, or that might have occurred to someone I know, that sparks more internal conversation for me. So my ideas they're a lot about meaning and purpose. I'm fascinated by the natural world. I don't know why. I still am not sure I understand this, but my little brain just got fascinated with quantum physics. Like, this pea brain it can't really, but the concepts. And so, I was at a language immersion program in 2015 in France. I just want to work on my French language. So while I was there, I'm like, well, Geneva's not that far away. You could go to CERN and just. So I
visit the particle accelerator just for kicks.
Seriously, maybe it's because they called it the God particle. I'm like, okay, I'm in. So I think sort of these big ideas for me that my brain just wants to work on. My practice every day, I try to read someone else's work, creative work, every morning. Lately, I've been dipping into Brian Doyle's book of short essays, One Long River of Song, which is just beautiful. And it's just, it reminds me of how much I love words, how much I love language, and how much it matters to have my say. Right? Sometimes we think, well, who's going to read it? What difference? I think the root word for personare, is to sound through. Nobody else is going to tell the stories I am. Nobody else is going to see the world the way I do. And therefore it's worth writing down, even if it's just for me. I have to revisit that a lot because, I do want to publish my work and I want people to read it. And I would like to be able to make a living off of it.
Of course.
So I think I have, my personality type, Myers-Briggs, is an ENFP, which means that's sort of the big picture kind of thing. And for me, that's messy and I can't get my arms around it. So that's why the highlighting and the color coding and things. I'm looking for themes. I also really believe the subconscious is busy helping us out. And so what's my subconscious telling me? And sometimes I'll take a piece that I don't really understand where it's going, or it's kind of a mess, and I'll put it up on the wall and I'll do that. Where am I talking about God? Where am I talking about death? Where am I talking about? And I'll surprise myself by what I'm trying to talk about. Oh, okay. All right. I'm going to pay more attention to that because clearly I didn't realize that was a theme till I saw that I was busy over here writing about it. The
Yeah.
other thing I like to do are that exercise called cut-ups, where you cut up pieces out and cut up pieces and shuffle them around.
No, talk more about this. That's new to me.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember, was it William James that might have done that? Again, when I work on a piece long enough, I can only see it that way. I can't see it any other way. Does that make sense? It's fixed. The neural pathways they're done. So when I take a piece and print it out and cut it up and just shuffle it and then just lay it out on the floor and see what happens if things are put together differently. And a lot of times I've made a discovery, it unjolts me, or it uproots me from what I'm seeing. It jolts me out of that fixed perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I found that useful. I've learned along the way I have to find ways to trick my brain, which, just thinks it's going one direction, or has, like I say, there are times when I know I've memorized an essay. I've revised it so many times, or I've been over it so many times that I can't envision it.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah. But I'm going to say, I'm looking at your windows there, and I've been known to co-opt windows like that and just tape stuff up.
Good to know. No, we need the natural light, because when I close the curtains here, it turns into my Rebecca's, my partner's, her yoga studios.
Oh,
if I papered over the windows, it would not be.
That is not going to work. That is not going to work.
Oh my goodness, that's so great. So talk a little bit about your Substack, because publishing work, like through a publisher, books, that's one thing. But I'm so grateful for living in this time where, Substack, really, you can independently kind of splash around whatever pool you want to splash in. I mean, this podcast itself is published through Substack. It's such a wonderful platform. I'm not getting a kickback for this, by the way. I really believe it.
Right.
Yours too. And I love the way you've titled it. I love that you have your conversations with some of your followers, and your content isn't like, there's no real structure beyond, here's sort of what I'm working on and thinking about today. And I would love for you to talk about your experience working on Substack as kind of this more stream of consciousness. Like, one of your things is even conversations with God. Like, you're constantly you're still searching. You're still basically on a cross-country journey, just in your own mind.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I love Substack too, because I think it's really geared to writers. And I was keeping up my blog after I got back from my trip. I kept it up. But it went kind of dormant because I really wasn't on a physical journey anymore. And I didn't want to just make up stuff that people would be like, that's tiresome. But I migrated over to Substack in 2022, early 2022. Part of the reason I did that was I could do my blog there. And of course, that's now a newsletter, is what it's called, but it's a blog. And then the other thing was, I had this itch. I mean, within reason, I'm going to try all kinds of things that I want to do. One of the things I always wanted to do was write a mystery novel.
Right. And you're doing it serialized, right? You're kind of pulling a Charles Dickens. Like, I saw on your Substack, you like publish each chapter as it's done.
Yeah. Yeah, and because I think Substack lends itself to that. And at the beginning, it was a huge experiment. And so this is a mystery novel that I actually wrote in 2002 while I was still serving as a pastor. Not the kind of thing a pastor would publish. But for me, it was a character that visited me early hours of the morning. And I'm just like, I just want to write about this character. And the story came to me. But I shelved it. I finished it in maybe 2005, but I didn't know what I wanted to do about it. Also, I didn't know what I was doing. And a good friend of mine of many years was the mystery writer Sue Grafton.
Okay.
And she read the first 50 pages and didn't hate it. I mean, sort of gave me, she said, 11 to 90 pats on the back and the pacing's good and keep going. So, but again, I didn't know what I was doing. And there were a whole lot of other things going on in my life. So really fast forward to 2022, and I'm thinking, here's this new platform, and I can serialize. I'm going to go back. I'm going to pull that out. And just for fun, it's also going to teach me about Substack, how to post, how it works, how to share with others, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, then, within maybe 6 months or so, Substack was beginning to be discovered by others and really take off. And so I'm still at that halfway through. I was posting old chapters that I would clean up before, and halfway through, that book took a turn. New characters showed up. I know, new characters showed up. And I'm just like, well, this is a fine kettle of fish. So now I'm just like on a fast horse. Well, it's kind of a slow horse because I'm slow in getting those up, but I'm sort of rewriting the whole thing as I go along. So, but it did teach me about serializing. It taught me about being part of the Substack community. And what I love, what I've finally learned about Substack and what I love it's evolved into for me is, in a way, your Substack can be your magazine publication or your newsletter, and you can have these sections. So one section it's called the Treehouse Conversations About God. It was me trying to reconstruct a theology, however messy that could be, and it doesn't need to be tied to the church anymore. It doesn't need to be official. It's the only part of my Substack that I ask for a paid subscription, and the reason is this. I've seen so much disrespect and meanness and attacking in conversations. Yep. I wanted it to be a place where people wanted to share their thoughts. They weren't going to be attacked by some troll. So it's my way.
Same thing, Rebecca. Yeah, I do the same thing. And I learned it from Michael Moore. As soon as you allow comments to non-paying subscribers, you just get bombarded with bots and trolls and people who just have no respect. But that little, even though it's nominal, that little subscription fee, then the comments are like, they're hatred-free zones. It's kind of like this weird blessing.
Right. And I think it invites people who are serious about having conversation where you're questioning big things. My other thing too is, if somebody is going to come onto my Substack and tell me that I'm going to hell because I'm a woman pastor or because I'm having questions, they're going to have to pay me to do it. So
if you want to take up that much negative space in my brain, it costs this.
I know. I'll deposit in my bank every month. Thank you. But the other parts, I do have a section called essays, and there's just a lot of ruminating there. I do have a section it might be called other stuff. So occasionally I've had a couple of other writer friends who've got books coming out, and I'll do more of this where I want people to read other people's stuff. I'm excited for my friends whose books are coming out. So I give them an option to just be a guest poster. In the future, so I have then my mystery novel is called Dead Ringer. And so that's a section to itself. If you only want to read, those chapters, you can go to that drop down. In the future, because I do love to cook and I love food, and I have an outline for a food memoir in essays, I'm probably going to start a section that has to do with food. I might start putting up some of those brief essays. It might be paid, it might not be. I don't know yet. I got enough going on right now, but that's kind of on the back burner because talking about food is fun.
Rebecca, so you just landed on another overlap for us. I actually forgot, because the stories were so good, I forgot to tell you that I also was a preacher for a year. I was raised in the Free Methodist Church. and my dad is a
Cool.
pastor. My mother was a bishop, and my mom is a celebrated soloist, soprano, and grandparents. Very much raised in that. I was even a Bible quizzer. I don't know if that was a thing that you ever experienced. I was a preacher for a year at a church in my college town, and
Cool.
that kind of journey in a whole different way. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But another overlap between you and me is this cooking thing. My readers and listeners know that I will often post about, the old fashioned that I'm aging in my new oak barrel, or the barbecue I'm going to try this weekend on my acorn grill. I'm very upfront about this.
Nice,
So
nice.
it's kind of, what is your go-to? Like, what have you mastered? Like, if there was a Rebecca Gummere cookbook, what are the top 3 recipes? If you had your own cooking show, what do you open with?
Give you my kale salad recipe.
Ooh.
Which people who say they don't like kale then ask for the recipe. It is never fail, and it's really simple, and it's something I just came up with to go. I was in Florida at the time and snagged some really fresh red snapper. And so I really engineered it to go with that. And then I was like, this is really good salad. I'm going to do this a lot. So that would be one. And then I probably would share, I've gotten into sourdough baking, and I really like it. It's a whole kind of practice that there's something almost monastic about some of it that I really like. I like so many, started that in during COVID, and it was at my house in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I don't know what it is about the New Mexico wild yeast, but I mean, that sucker was robust. I named it Big Guy, and like, just I would open the refrigerator and like say, please don't hurt me. I mean, it was like in this big vat, and I imagine it would have a voice like this. And then I managed to dry some and bring it back to North Carolina. So now what I have is really, New Mexico wild yeast and North Carolina wild yeast. And I named that one Wild Thing. And so anyway, what I'm saying is I talk to my
You talk to the
sourdough.
things you're about to guess.
I talk to them and I thank them because they're living. And I'm saying, how y'all doing today? And hello, gorgeous. Anyway, so I'm into the sourdough thing, and I've experimented with a variety of different recipes, but there's just a basic one that I like, and it excites me every time. You would think that I'm just like, well, no, every single time I'm like, wow.
Yeah, it's magic. It is magical.
It is magical. And so I really love that. The third recipe, it might be something as simple as sort of Italian garlic, olive oil, salt, and pepper on some bone-in chicken thighs that you just bake until the skin is crispy and the meat is tender and gorgeous, and simple stuff. I like to try complicated stuff, but I love to open the fridge in the pantry and see what's in there and just see what you can come up with, which I think is fun.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. If you send me that kale salad recipe, I will put it in the show notes and spread the message as far as
I will send it to you. It's a winner. And I say to
Awesome.
people, you know how you take a recipe and you want to adapt it? And I mean, I'll do that. I'm like, well, yeah, I did this, but I had that. Do this just exactly. Just try it, see what you think. Mess with it later, but try it this way once.
Rebecca, this has all been just so wonderful. I always like to finish with a spotlight on my guests. So here's a couple little fun questions to wrap up. You talked about this a little bit earlier, but maybe there's another one. What is your favorite story that you're currently reading or watching?
I don't know if there's a favorite story. Like I said, I've just gotten into reading Brian Doyle essays every morning. I love him for his sort of searching, the way his searching heart, his open mind, and his pondering of things that I have questions about too, mortality, meaning, that kind of thing. And of course, sadly, we lost him. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the lyricism of his writing as well. I just sort of let it seep into my pores. I think it's a lovely kind of companion book right now, especially we're living in times of massive uncertainty. So I appreciate being able to just, hear from a master, really. I mean, I think that his wisdom is so beautiful and his simple stories.
That's great. Next question. If you could ask any one person any one question, who would that person be and what would you ask?
Any one person. Boy, that's a really good question. I think I would ask Ray Bradbury if he could write just one more story about Greentown, Illinois.
We would all be the better for it. Oh my goodness. What a great answer.
Really?
Man, that's so good. All right, here's an easier one. What's always in your fridge?
Well, sourdough starter.
Of course. Wild thing.
Yeah, always in my fridge. Let's see, purple onion, celery, carrots, the basics, so that on a turn of a dime I can kind of make anything. And really good butter.
Okay, yeah. Yep. All right. What is the best advice that you have ever taken?
To just do that trip. I was thinking out loud, and there was more than one person who said, just do it. Just do it. And I was, 63 at the time. It's like, I can do this now. I did hesitate. A woman traveling alone. There were all kinds of, I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking, are you sure? What are you doing? What if this, what if that? The people who said, just go. Thank you.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Rebecca, thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing the vulnerability here. So last part of the spotlight here, where can listeners go find out more about you? Where can they find your writing, visit you online, any social media? Where can people learn more about Rebecca Gummere?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on. And it's just been a pure delight. So on my socials, at rgummere, RGUMMERE. I'm on Blue Sky, so it's a different there. But I think if you search Rebecca Gummere, you should be able to find it. My website is RebeccaGummere.com, and I'm on Substack. The name of my newsletter is Mystery, Memoir, and Meaning.
Great. And everyone, I will link to all those things directly in the show notes. You can grab them. And yeah, I will bug you, Rebecca. Send me that salad recipe. I will put that in there too.
Absolutely. You got it. You got it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All gratitude. Really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. And like I said, just pure enjoyment, and hope that we get to chat again sometime. Now we've got all these overlaps.
That's right. Yeah, we need to follow up, go down the rabbit holes.
Exactly.
You've been listening to the Page and Stage podcast. All my thanks to this week's guest and to all of you out there for listening. If you enjoyed or found value in this podcast, I ask that you share it with at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. I use an incredible online app, Riverside.fm, to produce this podcast. If you are interested in producing your own podcast or other audio or video content, I cannot recommend them highly enough. I've left a link for you in the show notes so you can check them out for yourself. The show notes are also where you can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects. I use Substack as my primary publishing platform over at pageandstage.art. The Page and Stage podcast is only one part of my story coaching work. You can check out everything I'm up to over at pageandstage.art, including my other podcast, a storytelling resources page, my own books and plays, my one-on-one coaching, as well as my weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes. You can sign up for free over at pageandstage.art. And hey, feel free to send me your thoughts, comments, and questions at jason@pageandstage.art. I always love to hear from you, and I might just even feature your questions on future episodes. Thank you again for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.